Hey guys, Yulia here. So today's video will be all about composting. So in a couple of previous videos, I actually used my own compost that I made in the garden, and a number of you wanted to know more about composting process. So this video will be two parts. The first part will be where I will be talking about the process of composting, like what to use to compost, what kind of materials you can use, how long it takes. And then the second part of the video, I will actually show you my own setup for composting. So if you know everything about composting, more power to you. You can just skip right to the end of this video if you want to see my own setup for compost. But if you want to learn more on how to compost, just stay with me and I will tell you how. So if you're still with me, first I wanted to start with the definition of composting. And this is not some sort of a scientific definition that I found in the book somewhere. This is more of my own understanding what composting is. And what I think composting is basically nature's recycling of any biodegradable materials that we may have in our home or maybe in the garden. So why would you compost? And sometimes I ask myself that question when composting gets hard and I could just go to the store and buy compost. But then I think about all of the material that I have in my garden and in the kitchen that I could be recycling in this wonderful nutrient-dense soil amendment. So that's definitely one of the reasons. And also to save money. Compost is not cheap. They actually run anywhere from $7 to $14 a bag. So, and also it's bagged in plastic, which is, you know, not that great for environment. And whenever you make your own compost at home, there is no plastic involved. And what also, like how I feel about compost is that I feel incredible accomplishment when I actually make compost. I don't know, it's like, look what I made. I made compost for my garden. So anyways, that's definitely like just a couple of points why you would want to make compost. I'm sure some people can add some more to those points. So the next point is, where do you compost? And if you think I'm moving the camera around, you're not crazy. I'm just trying to avoid this overhead light that is coming in right now. It's very distracting. Anyways, so where do you compost? Well, first of all, composting process is the same no matter where you do it. But different enclosures or contraptions that you could buy make it either faster or slower process. So they're basically kind of like a couple of different things that you could buy. Either a bin, like some sort of an enclosure where you collect in your material and it starts composting, or a tumbler. And then there are also these cone-shaped things where you put your material in there and it slowly breaks down. In the township next to me, they actually will sell you one for half the price because the township encourages people to compost. So make sure that you check with your town or city if they encourage your composting. They will a lot of times sell you one for less money if you were to buy it in the store. Anyways, the freestanding bins can be made out of wood. It could be made out of chicken wire. Doesn't really matter as long as it contains your composting material. Some people just throw a heap of their composting material without an enclosure. I kind of find it, it's a little, first looks a little messy, and second of all, I don't think it biodegrades as well as when it's contained in like a cube kind of form. Now the tumbler is also a great option for composting because it is elevated off the ground. You don't have to turn over your compost. You can just turn the handle and it will oxygenate your compost like that. And also if you have trees on your property, trees tend to invade any of the compost heaps that you have. And then they will basically grow up the compost and suck all the nutrients out of it before you get to use it. So I have both. I have an enclosure where I collect my material, and then I have the tumbler where I actually have the compost cooking. So now that we know where to compost, we need to know what to compost. And the compost material is basically divided into greens and browns. Now, greens are things like your kitchen scraps, fresh grass clippings, your weeds, fresh leaves. And then the brown materials are things like leaves, the fall leaves, and straw, hay, wood shavings. So the green materials break up really fast, and the brown materials break up much slower. So when you put two and two together, they actually help each other to break down. And then there are tons of microorganisms that enter your compost heap, and they start basically munching on your compost pile, breaking them down even further. So I also want to mention some things that you should not compost. You definitely should not be putting any meat, dairy, fats into your compost pile. Those just wouldn't break down. They have no value to the compost at all. And in my own experience, I also do not add any of the like orange peels, lemon peels, because they take forever to compost. Now, when you are collecting your compost material, the more you break it down before you put it in your compost heap, the faster your compost will be ready. So if you have, let's say, dried grass, break it down in smaller pieces, or leaves, shred them as much as you can. At the end of the day, it will all biodegrade, but the question is, how soon? And we all want our compost sooner rather than later. Now, as for the troubleshooting, there are times when your compost pile just refuses to heat up. And when you know your compost is cooking, it's when it gets really hot. So in that case, you probably do not have enough green material. So put on some more kitchen scraps in there, put in some more grass clippings or weeds, and it will start to heat up. It also may be dry. Moisture is quite important to compost, so go ahead and water it. The consistency of your compost pile should be like a wrung out sponge, and not wetter, not drier. Now, sometimes your compost is too wet, right? So it either rained, and if you don't have a tumbler, that's why the tumbler is a little bit better. You can control the situation a little bit better as opposed to if you have a bin. So if it rained a lot and your compost is too wet, you can add paper. You can add some more of the brown material like hay, like leaves. And I forgot to mention that you can also add used paper towels. Anytime I use a paper towel, unless you use like harsh chemicals on your kitchen, obviously don't use those paper towels. But if you're like drying off your hands or something like that, you can put it in the compost pile. It's really, really good. So how long does it take to make compost? And the answer is it totally depends. It depends on what kind of enclosure you're using, what kind of materials you have in there. Is it too dry? Is it too wet? Is it too cold outside, or is it too hot? How small did you break down all of the material? And how often do you oxygenate or turn over your pile? So on average, it takes anywhere from 4 to 8 months to make compost. Some people say you can make it in a matter of 2 months, which is, more power to them. I'm not sure that's possible, but in my experience, I usually make compost in about 6 months. So anyway, let me show you my own setup for compost right now. Okay, so this is my not so glamorous area behind the garage where I have my compost set up. And I'm sure we all have these areas in our gardens, right guys? It's not just me. I know it's not just me. Anyway, so let me explain it as best as I can. So I have these three things here, right? 2 enclosures and 1 tumbler. And let me explain logistics behind this. So these 2 enclosures right here are actually made out of, believe it or not, a puppy enclosure. We had, when we had our dog as a puppy, we would put him in this big enclosure. It has 8 sections. And then I just took it apart and I made 2 enclosures. It's about 3 by 3. And it does have pins. You know, I like to recycle everything. I don't like to throw things away. So I kind of just came up with this. So the first enclosure here are fresh weeds, fresh browns, fresh kitchen scraps. This is where I collect my stuff right now. The second enclosure is, it's about a month old. And it was just like this, but a lot more material. And it's already started to break down. It always amazes me how fast it just goes down. And then here I have my ready compost. Looks beautiful. So this one I'm actually going to use today to put on some plants. So the reason why I have these 3 things here instead of 1 is because I can make more compost this way and kind of turn over a lot of the material from my garden, because I have tons of weeds and things are just constantly accumulating. So I fill this one in currently, and then while I'm filling this one in, that one is already kind of cooking. And then I would have this one cooking as well, but this one would be closer to completion. So this way I will have compost much faster. So like for example, I'll empty this one today and I'll put this one right here and leave it there for 3 months and make sure I turn it over every other day, and it will start making compost really fast because it's already half biodegraded. And this one will go into that one because it will be empty. So this will start biodegrading. And then I will start filling this one with new weeds. So I make a lot more compost this way because my garden is quite big and I do need lots more compost, and I do produce a lot of weeds and stuff like that. So this just works much better for me than just one thing, because a lot of people, they would have just either a tumbler or enclosure. So you fill it in and you have to wait 4, 5, 6 months until your compost is ready. Meanwhile, I already kind of pre-make my compost in these things here. I hope that makes sense. Alright guys, so this is how I make my compost, and I hope the first part of this video wasn't too kind of lecture-like. A lot of times I'm trying to understand myself how things work, because I think if I do, I can make them work better. That's why I have the setup of the compost that I do, because I wanted to work faster and make more compost for my garden. Anyways, if you have any questions or comments, which I am sure you will, post them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.